Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, occupied the whole land and attacked Samaria, which he besieged for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Israel, the king of Assyria took Samaria and deported the children of Israel to Assyria, settling them in Halah at the Habor, a river of Gazan, and the cities of the Medes. This came about because the children of Israel sinned against the Lord, their God, who had brought them up from the land of Egypt, from under the domination of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and because they venerated other gods. They followed the rites of the nations, whom the Lord had cleared out of the way of the children of Israel, and the kings of Israel whom they set up. And though the Lord warned Israel and Judah by every prophet and seer, give up your evil ways and keep my commandments and statutes, in accordance with the entire law which I enjoined on your fathers, and which I sent you by my servants, the prophets. They did not listen, but were as stiff-necked as their fathers, who had not believed in the Lord their God. They rejected his statutes, the covenant which he had made with their fathers, and the warnings which he had given them, till, in his great anger against Israel, the Lord put them away out of his sight. Only the tribe of Judah was left. Verbum Domini. Help us with your right hand, O Lord, and answer us. O God, you have rejected us and broken our defenses. You have been angry. Rally us. You have rocked the country and split it open. Repair the cracks in it, for it is tottering. You have made your people feel hardships. You have given us stupefying wine. Have not you, O God, rejected us, so that you go not forth, O God, with our armies? Give us aid against the foe, for worthless is the help of men.
Able to discern reflections and thoughts of the heart.
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Lectio Sancti Evangelii secundum Matteum.
Gloria tibi, Domine.
Jesus said to his disciples, "Stop judging, that you may not be judged. For as you judge, so will you be judged. And the measure with which you measure will be measured out to you. Why do you notice a splinter in your brother's eye, but do not perceive the wooden beam in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me remove that splinter from your eye,' while the wooden beam is in your eye? You hypocrite, remove the wooden beam from your eye first, then you will see clearly to remove the splinter from your brother's eye." Verbum Domini. I first of all want to wish congratulations and blessings on my own parents, Nicholas and Rose Wolf, who are celebrating their 63rd wedding anniversary today. Congratulations, Mom and Dad. And also to friends Barb and Norm Campbell, who were married the very same day. Today is their 63rd wedding anniversary as well. And today we are actually celebrating a feast of two martyrs for the indissolubility of marriage. And of course, your own marriages are also a beautiful testimony of that, being united for 63 years. And Saints John Fisher and St. Thomas More died for that truth, holding fast to the faith, the Catholic faith of the indissolubility of marriage. And today I especially wanted to focus on the remarkable figure of St. Thomas More and relate it to the first words that we heard in the gospel today from Matthew chapter 7, where the Lord said, "Stop judging, lest you be judged. As you judge, so will you be judged." And how, when we're trying to understand, well, how am I supposed to live that out? Does that mean I can never call out anything that's wrong? No, it doesn't mean that. But it does mean that we can't discern the interior motivations or background or whatever of the person in their particular fault that we may observe. And we see this lived out so beautifully in St. Thomas More, remarkably. What a remarkable man he was. He lived in the 15th century in England. And an Anglican clergyman and author, Jonathan Swift, said this of him: "He was the person of the greatest virtue these islands ever produced." He was a man of unswerving fidelity to God, to his family. And yet we see, and I was reading yesterday, I had the opportunity, there's a wonderful book I found in our library, St. Thomas More Source Book, and it has the original sources. There were two biographies written shortly after his life. One was by his friend Erasmus, and it's a shorter biography. He talks especially about More's character and his affability and his friendship, his humor. And the other one is a longer one that was written by his son-in-law, William Roper, who married his eldest daughter, Margaret. And we learned a lot of the details. If you've seen that beautiful movie, and if you haven't seen it, I recommend that you see it. A Man for All Seasons, based on the play by Robert Bolt about Thomas More. And much of that dialogue actually comes from William Roper's description of his own father-in-law. So I wanted to give some of those quotations regarding his character, St. Thomas More, and to begin with a quote of G.K. Chesterton. Now, G.K. Chesterton wrote this in 1929, getting close to 100 years ago. G.K. Chesterton wrote this. He said, "Blessed Thomas More," he was blessed at the time, "is more important at this moment than at any moment since his death. Even perhaps the great moment of his dying, which I'll be talking about. But he is not quite so important as he will be in about 100 years' time." Isn't that a remarkable quote? And why is that? Because he was such a man of virtue, uncompromising, and yet not hard. Here's what Erasmus, his dear friend, wrote in his own biography, that he said Thomas More seemed to be born for friendship. Friendship he seems born and designed for. No one is more open-hearted in making friends or more tenacious in keeping them. Nobody is less swayed by public opinion, and yet nobody is closer to the feelings of ordinary men. He said of Thomas that he was convinced that everyone, no matter how gifted, is incomplete and thus in need of the help of others. Thus, we need friends. We need friends. He didn't see that, and his dear friend, King Henry VIII, he was very close to Henry VIII. Even after his retirement, they remained friends, even during that time of tension, and eventually the advisors of Henry VIII had him done away with. But that he understood that even those who governed, like Henry VIII, that they couldn't just say that they had absolute authority over everything and everyone. You know, they needed the counsel of others, and of course, Henry VIII relied on Thomas's counsel during much of Thomas's life as a chancellor. Erasmus also said, "There is no man so melancholy by nature," which Erasmus seems to have been. "There's no man so melancholy by nature that More does not enliven him. No disaster so great that he does not dissipate its unpleasantness." Now, he was a lawyer, so he had to make many judgments. So our Lord talked about, "Do not judge, lest you be judged." And what he did is he made himself available to the people, and he tried to reconcile them before bringing it to civil court. We live in such a litigious society, don't we? Or, "Hey, I'm going to sue you." So that's a threat that we can throw out because somebody has wronged us. Well, Thomas saw that that's not the way to go. Let's reconcile. Let's understand. Let's be reconciled. That's the thing that he always tried to bring about. His son-in-law accused him. He said, "You don't show favor to your own family." And Thomas said, "Look, if my own father was on my left side and the devil was on the right side and the devil was right, I would have to decide in his case." So he's saying, no, I have to judge according to the merits of the case and the rightfulness or wrongfulness. He was a man of pure conscience who strove to always live in accord with God's will. And his family had prayer. Erasmus says that they would pray often the Psalms together in the evening. But it was a merry house. And so often he would write in his letters. You can't read his letters, and many of his letters are contained in this book, without smiling, because you see his humor, you see his goodwill, you see his affability that he had. And so his house had musical instruments. It had a monkey. It had a ferret and a fox and different things, because he was interested in how living things acted and what they did. And he wanted his family to be exposed to these things. And even when he was in the king's court and he was away from his family, he would write to his children. And they're very charming letters. And in one of them, he says, I think I'm going to have to retire Master Nicholas, who was teaching them astronomy. Henry VIII would take him on the top of the roof, the flat roof, and he would have Thomas explain to him the constellations. He was interested in astronomy. And Thomas had his own children being taught astronomy. He said, I think I'm going to have to retire Master Nicholas because I learned that you now know where the polar star is and where the North Star is, that you can even distinguish between the sun and the moon now. And so you see his charm, his sense of humor, and his encouragement for his children, even though he was away at the king's court. He always was interested in their education and their furtherance of their studies. And Erasmus says that even he treated his wife, he had been married a second time because his first wife, Jane, died after the birth of their 4 children. But Thomas saw that it was necessary for his children to have a mother, and shortly within a month he married a widow who was older than he was, Alice. And it was said, Erasmus said, he treated her like a 15-year-old girl that he was in love with. That was always the attitude that he had toward his dear wife. So we see all of these virtues in St. Thomas, and especially his unflinching faith, his devout prayer. Here is something that he wrote to his children that I think is important for us to take to heart today. And this is something that William Roper relates in his life of Sir Thomas More. It is now no mastery for you children to go to heaven. For everybody gives you good counsel. Everybody gives you good example. You see virtue rewarded and vice punished, so that you are carried up to heaven even by your chins. So they're surrounded by all these good example, this good advice, this good counsel. And so it's no big deal that you're going to be able to get to heaven, because all of this has been given to you. You've been surrounded by all of this. We think of the Christian culture that many of us older folks grew up in. But then he continues, but if you live in a time that no man will give you good counsel, nor no man will give you good example, when you shall see virtue punished and vice rewarded, if you will then stand fast and firmly stick to God, upon pain of my life, though you be but half good, God will allow you the whole good. So he's saying, be steadfast. And of course, he gave that example. And one of the ways that I wanted to bring out how he lived that first sentence in today's gospel, stop judging, lest you be judged. The judgment that you give will be given back to you, is his own condemnation that took place in his own trial. And William Roper, in his biography, gives many of those details. And if you ever see that closing speech of A Man for All Seasons, that film, those come from William Roper's biography of Sir Thomas More. And I'll read some of those from Thomas More. But Richard Rich lied under oath about Thomas More, and because of that, he was before the court condemned to be put to death, to be beheaded. And Thomas said this to Richard Rich shortly after Richard had made this perjury. In good faith, Master Rich, I am sorrier for your perjury than for my own peril. And then at the end, the Lord Chancellor said to the rest of those in the court, said to Thomas More, do you have anything else to say? Here's what Moore answered. More I have not to say, my lords, but that like the blessed apostle St. Paul, as we read in the Acts of the Apostles, was present and consented to the death of St. Stephen and kept their clothes that stoned him, and yet now they are together holy saints in heaven and shall continue their friends forever, so I verily trust and shall right heartily pray that though your lordships have now here on earth been judges to my condemnation, yet may we yet hereafter in heaven merrily all meet together to our everlasting salvation. So he's not wishing that they will likewise be condemned, but rather that just like St. Paul and St. Steve now rejoice in heaven, even though Paul concurred in the killing of Stephen, that even though these judges have laid down this condemnation unjustly, that he heartily prays that they will merrily meet together in heaven to their salvation. Often you find that in his letters, that will merrily meet together in heaven. You see how he is not wanting or wishing the condemnation of those who are at fault. And he said to Richard, Rich, I'm sorrier for your perjury than I am for my own peril. And even as he is brought to his death, we see too, he never lost his sense of hope and heart and humor. And so William Roper relates that the scaffold where Thomas was going to be led was so frail, it was shaky, and it was almost like it was going to fall down. And so here's what Thomas said to the one who was leading him to his beheading. Oh, here it is. I pray you, Master Lieutenant, see me safe up, and for my coming down, let me shift for myself. May we merrily meet in heaven. That's my wish for all of us, those of you who are with us through EWTN, all of those who are here present. May we all, as St. Thomas More said, merrily meet in heaven. Be faithful to the Lord. Look to the example of Thomas More, his virtue, so much needed in today's world, as G.K. Chesterton pointed out. His example is needed more, he foresaw, in 100 years' time. And let us men follow his example, learn from him, read his letters, read his biography. It can't but help us all to be better people.